I'm Isaac, and this is The Mountain Takes. Mountains keep secrets. They keep the names of the dead. They keep the exact moments of failure. They keep the reasons climbers make the choices they make. Today, we're examining what we can actually know about mountain deaths and what we never will. Stick around, because the real story begins now. It was 11:56 a.m. on April 25, 2015, at Mount Everest Base Camp at 17,500 feet. The time would be recorded precisely because what happened next would be measured by seismologists, documented by news organizations around the world, and investigated by mountaineering experts. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal. It was the strongest earthquake to strike the country in 80 years. The epicenter was 600 kilometers away from Mount Everest, but at extreme altitude, distance doesn't matter. The seismic waves travel through the mountains themselves. The ground doesn't shake gently at high altitude, it shatters. At that exact moment, Dan Fredenberg was in a tent at base camp reviewing photographs. He had been on Everest for 3 weeks with 3 other Google employees. His mission was simple but ambitious: document the glaciers on Everest for Save the Ice, a non-profit organization he had co-founded dedicated to climate change awareness. He was there to photograph what global warming looks like from the highest point on Earth. He was there to show the world that climate change isn't abstract. It is visible in the melting glaciers of mountains. He had prepared for this expedition for weeks. He had trained. He had planned. He had survived a previous avalanche on this mountain just a year earlier. Everything suggested he would walk down from base camp in a few days and return to his life as Google X's privacy director, as an inventor, as an adventurer. But the Earth had other plans. Dan Fredenberg was 33 years old, born in Mission Viejo, California, raised on a farm, educated at UC Irvine and USC. He had built a career at Google, working on privacy and innovation. He had co-founded Google's expedition team, the team that captured street view imagery from the summit of Everest, from the Great Barrier Reef, from the most extreme locations on Earth. He had dated actress Sophia Bush. He had been on television. He had been part of a world that most people only read about, but more importantly, he had chosen to use his platform for something larger than himself. He had chosen to climb mountains to document climate change. When the earthquake hit base camp, the impact was immediate and catastrophic. The Serek, a massive block of hanging glacier ice on the west shoulder of Everest, fractured. The ice that had been suspended above base camp for decades suddenly lost its anchor. Gravity took over. The Serek collapsed. The ice fell. It fell 2,000 feet. It fell through the air and hit the mountain and exploded into fragments. The avalanche that resulted wasn't a slow slide of snow. It was an explosion of ice chunks moving at hundreds of miles per h down the mountain directly toward where hundreds of climbers were gathered at base camp. The sound was described as like thunder, like the sky breaking, like the earth screaming. Climbers who survived reported seeing nothing but white cloud of ice particles and snow moving toward them at impossible speed. In the seconds it took to comprehend what was happening, the avalanche hit. Ice fragments the size of houses collided with tents. Climbers were thrown through the air. Equipment was destroyed. Tents collapsed. In those first terrible seconds, the mountain that climbers had been preparing for weeks to climb suddenly became a weapon. Dan Fredenberg was in a tent when it hit. His 3 Google colleagues were nearby Lawrence Yu, who would later post the company statement about Dan's death, the other 2 whose names are less documented, but who would walk away alive. The avalanche hit their area. The ice came through. Dan Fredenberg was struck by debris, head injuries, multiple traumas, catastrophic damage. The avalanche passed. The mountain went silent, and Dan Fredenberg was dead. His sister Megan found out through the expedition team. She posted on his Instagram account, because that is how the world learned about his death. This is Dan's little sister Megan. I regret to inform all who loved him that during the avalanche on Everest early this morning, our Dan suffered from a major head injury and didn't make it. We appreciate all of the love that has been sent our way thus far, and know his soul and his spirit will live on in so many of us. All our love and thanks to those who shared this life with our favorite, hilarious, strong-willed man. He was and is everything to us. Thank you. The post had thousands of comments within minutes. His death had already made news globally because the earthquake had killed over 3,200 people across Nepal. But Dan's death was personal. He was a known figure. He had a face. He had a story. He had been trying to save the world. Google responded officially. Privacy Director Lawrence, you posted a statement that would be seen by millions. Sadly, we lost one of our own in this tragedy. Dan Fredenberg, a longtime member of the privacy organization in Mountain View, was in Nepal with 3 other Googlers hiking Mount Everest. He has passed away. The other 3 Googlers with him are safe, and we are working to get them home quickly. Our thoughts are with the people of Nepal and with Dan's family and friends during this terrible time. Google announced it was donating $1 million to earthquake relief, but no amount of money could change what had happened at 11:56 a.m. on April 25, 2015. Actress Sophia Bush, who had dated Dan in 2013 and 2014, posted on Instagram, Dan Fredenberg was one of a kind, fearless, funny. The climbing community mourned. His colleagues at Google mourned. His family mourned. And the mountain stood unchanged, indifferent to the human tragedy it had just created. Dan Fredenberg's body was recovered from base camp. His body came down from the mountain. His family would be able to say goodbye. But the fact that he had survived one avalanche on Everest a year earlier, that he had been experienced, that he had been prepared, that he had been there for a noble purpose, none of it mattered. The earthquake didn't check credentials. The avalanche didn't ask questions. What made Dan's death particularly devastating was the randomness of it. His 3 colleagues were alive. They were in the same camp. They were experiencing the same earthquake, but they survived and he did not. This is what mountains do. They don't kill the weak and spare the strong. They don't kill the unprepared and spare the experienced. They kill randomly. They take whoever happens to be in the wrong place when ice decides to fall and gravity decides to win. Dan Fredenberg had wanted to show the world that glaciers were melting. He had wanted to document climate change through photography. He had wanted to use his position at Google, his fame, his resources to make people understand that the mountains we admire are disappearing. He had been 33 years old. He had accomplished more than most people accomplish in a lifetime. And then, in 5 seconds, it was over. The mountain took him not because he was weak, not because he was unprepared, but simply because he was there. Because the earthquake came, because the ice fell, because that is what mountains do. His family established a fund in his memory. Save the Ice continued his work documenting climate change on mountains. The climbing community discussed avalanche risk and seric danger. Base camp protocols were reviewed, and Dan Fredenberg remained the man who tried to save the mountains, died because of them. His story is a reminder that experience doesn't guarantee safety at extreme altitude, that noble purposes don't exempt you from mountain dangers, that being good enough, being smart enough, being experienced enough still isn't enough when you are at the mercy of forces that don't care about human intention. I am Isaac from The Mountain Takes. If you've ever tried to accomplish something bigger than yourself and wondered if it was worth the risk, subscribe, because there are more stories of mountains that don't distinguish between who deserves to live and who deserves to die. They take whoever stands beneath them when the ice falls. I'll see you on the next base camp. Arun Kumar Tiwari was 53 years old when he arrived at Mount Everest Base Camp in April 2026. He was a senior director at an IT company in Hyderabad, India, the kind of person who builds software systems that other people depend on, who makes decisions in air-conditioned offices, who manage teams and budgets and timelines. For 20 years, his life had been calculated: spreadsheets, performance reviews, 5-year plans. But there was one thing in his life that couldn't be calculated, couldn't be managed, couldn't be controlled through will alone: Mount Everest. Arun was not new to mountains. He had summited Mount Elbrus in Russia to Europe's highest peak at 18,510 feet. He had stood on top of Mount Denali in Alaska at 20,310 feet. He had reached the summit of Mount Aconcagua in Argentina at 22,841 feet. He had climbed other peaks that most people will never even know exist. He was an accomplished mountaineer by any measure, but Everest is different. Everest doesn't care about your other summits. Everest doesn't acknowledge your experience. Everest only cares about whether you respect it enough to survive it. In 2025, Arun made his first attempt at Everest. He trained obsessively for months. He did altitude chamber training. He ran fitness regimens that would have exhausted younger men. He bought the best equipment. He hired experienced guides. He had prepared in every way that preparation is possible. And then he climbed. He pushed through the lower camps. He acclimatized. He moved up the mountain with the discipline of a man used to executing plans. But at 7,200 meters, still almost 3,000 meters below the summit, his body rebelled. Health complications forced him to turn around. He had to descend. He had to go home. He had to admit that despite all his planning, despite all his experience, despite all his will, the mountain had rejected him. That failure haunted him. For 12 months, it consumed him. This was the last thing Arun needed to prove. This was the final mountain on his list. This was the achievement that would define his mountaineering legacy, and he had failed. So in 2026, he returned. He was older now, at 53. He was still fit, but his recovery times were slower. His body was less forgiving than it had been at 52, but he didn't care. He had one last chance, one last climbing season where the weather window would align with his schedule, one last opportunity to do this before time made it impossible. He came back to Everest with a desperation that only comes from a second attempt. This time, everything felt different. The weather in May 2026 was favorable. The route was well established. He had the advantage of knowing what to expect this time. He wasn't a climber anymore who was wondering what Everest would throw at him. He had already been rejected once. Now he was coming back, not with hope, but with something more dangerous than hope. He was coming back with certainty. He was coming back convinced that he had learned the lessons the mountain had taught him in 2025. He was coming back thinking that knowledge plus experience plus willpower would equal success. By May 20th, Arun was at Camp 4 at 26,000 feet, waiting for the weather window to open for the summit push. The forecast was good. The next morning, May 21st, the team began their assault on the summit. Arun moved faster than his guide recommended. His oxygen saturation was lower than it should have been for his fitness level, but Arun felt strong. He felt ready. He felt like this was finally his moment. His guide called for him to slow down. Arun kept pacemaking. By 4 a.m., he had covered more distance than planned. He was ahead of schedule. He was ahead of his guide. He was ahead of the reality of where his body actually was, at 28,000 feet. At 5:30 p.m. on May 21st, 2026, Arun Kumar placed his foot on the summit of Mount Everest. He was standing at 29,032 feet, on a platform of ice and rock smaller than a dinner table at the highest point on Earth. The sun was setting. The sky was turning orange. He could see for hundreds of miles in every direction mountains below him. On May 22, 2021, the south summit was choked with ice and blowing snow at -34 degrees. The wind speed was clocked at 44 knots, creating a wind chill factor that could freeze exposed skin in less than 60 seconds. Werner Steinbach was a 52-year-old corporate consultant from Innsbruck who had forged his mandatory medical clearance forms to hide an advanced coronary artery condition. He had spent his life savings on the trip and believed his personal willpower could override a physical blockage in his heart. Within hours, that choice produced a fatal sequence. Werner was the kind of client who treated guides like hired servants, once stating loudly at base camp, "I paid for a summit attempt, not a medical evaluation." His guide was Ngawang Tendi, 31, who had survived a 70-foot crevasse fall rescue in 2018 and held 6 summits across Everest, K2, and Annapurna. Ngawang was trying to build a 3-room trekking lodge with his wife in Namche Bazaar to secure their financial independence, a project costing $18,000. Ngawang noticed Werner was experiencing severe chest pains and using an unprescribed vasodilator during the acclimatization rotations. When Ngawang raised the issue with the expedition doctor, Werner threatened a massive breach of contract lawsuit against the entire agency, utilizing his legal connections to silence the staff. The system dismissed the concern to avoid the litigation. Werner's behavior escalated on the summit push, where he began consuming double his allocated oxygen flow rate to combat his failing circulatory system. Ngawang quietly accepted the situation and stopped making official entries in the logbook, focusing entirely on keeping the man moving. By 11 a.m., the bottleneck near the Hillary step was 3 hours long. That was the moment the medical fraud caught up with him. Werner suffered a massive cardiac event at 28,700 feet. He collapsed directly onto the fixed line, blocking the entire route. Ngawang spent 2 hours performing compressions in the freezing wind while other climbers scrambled over them. Same outcome. outcome, two completely different conclusions about what it meant. That distinction is everything. Werner died on the rope, his face turning a deep, hypoxic purple. I keep coming back to the tactile detail of his heavy plastic boots, dangling uselessly over the Kangshung face, while Ngawang tried to secure his frozen remains to the anchor. Ngawang suffered severe frostbite on his toes during the prolonged attempt to revive his client, requiring partial amputations that ended his career as a high-altitude guide. He was 31 when he retired from high-altitude work. 31. The half-built trekking lodge in Namche Bazaar was sold to a competitor for a fraction of its value to pay for his medical bills. It was May 12, 2024. Everest's Khumbu icefall, 18,500 feet, temperature -8 degrees Fahrenheit, the ice constantly shifting and groaning beneath their feet. Patricia Wainwright was 52 years old, a luxury real estate broker from Scottsdale, Arizona. She had paid $85,000 for her Everest expedition and believed that entitled her to whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. Her only high-altitude experience was a helicopter tour of Everest Base Camp the previous year, and she had worn crampons exactly 0 times before this expedition. On May 10th, her expedition team reached Camp 1 at 19,500 feet. Patricia immediately began complaining about the food, the sleeping arrangements, and the fact that there were other climbers on the mountain. She demanded a private tent when the group had only shared tents. When her lead Sherpa, Tenji, explained that private tents weren't available at Camp 1, Patricia screamed at him for 10 minutes. Other climbers recorded the outburst, calling him incompetent and threatening to have him fired. The warning signs were obvious. Her guides noted her refusal to follow safety protocols. She would unclip from fixed ropes in the icefall to take selfies. She skipped acclimatization rotations because they were too boring. Dr. Pemba Sherpa, the expedition doctor, wrote in his log that Patricia had a resting heart rate of 110 beats per minute at base camp, a sign of poor acclimatization, but she refused medication because she didn't trust mountain medicine. The inciting incident came on May 14th. The team was crossing a 3-ladder section in the upper icefall at 20,000 feet. One ladder had shifted overnight, creating a gap. Patricia reached the broken ladder at 7:23 a.m. and stopped. When her Sherpa, Tenji, told her to wait while he stabilized it, Patricia began screaming. Witnesses heard her say, "I paid $85,000. Fix it now. I don't have time for your incompetence." Tenji tried to explain that rushing could collapse the entire ladder bridge. Patricia grabbed the fixed rope and tried to cross anyway. Her crampon caught on a loose rung. She lost her grip at 7:26 a.m. She fell 30 feet into a crevasse, landing on her left side on an ice ledge 15 feet down. The escalation was immediate. Team members lowered a rope. Patricia was conscious but had a compound fracture of her left femur bone visible through her down suit. Tenji reached her at 7:41 a.m. She was still demanding things, yelling at him to get her out faster, complaining that her leg hurt and that this was his fault for not fixing the ladder properly. They extracted her at 8:15 a.m. The rescue descent through the icefall took 4 hours. Patricia was in and out of consciousness. Her oxygen saturation was 62% at 19,000 feet. Anything below 70% at that altitude indicates severe injury combined with hypoxia. The death moment came at 12:47 p.m. on May 14th, 2024, at Everest Base Camp, 17,500 feet. Dr. Pemba had set up an emergency trauma station. Patricia's leg was splinted, but internal bleeding from the femur fracture had been ongoing for over 5 hours. Her blood pressure was 70/40 when she arrived. She looked at Tenji, the man she had screamed at, and said, "You should have just fixed the ladder." Then she stopped breathing. Resuscitation attempts failed. She died of hemorrhagic shock complicated by high-altitude pulmonary edema. The aftermath was damning. The expedition company released their incident report on June 3, 2024. It documented 17 separate complaints from Patricia, including demands that other climbers be removed from the route, that she be given helicopter transport through the icefall, and that her Sherpa carry her backpack despite weight limits. Tenji gave a statement to the Nepal Mountaineering Association. He said, "I have guided Everest for 12 years. I have never seen someone so unwilling to listen. The mountain does not care about your money." Patricia's family sued the expedition company for $15 million. The case was dismissed in October 2024 when audio recordings of Patricia screaming at Tenji were entered into evidence. Her husband told the Arizona Republic she was just passionate about getting what she paid for. The comment section was not kind, but Patricia Wainwright wasn't the only entitled climber on Everest that season. A different kind of Karen was about to make a demand that would get her banned from Nepal entirely.
It was May 3rd, 2021, on the Nepal side of Mount Everest, where the weather window that opens in spring closes the moment it wants to, and nobody can argue with it. Mason Reinhold came from Park City, Utah. He was 31. He'd sold a Techstar up in 2018 and decided that what he actually wanted was to explore. He called it that in interviews. What he meant was climbing mountains and posting about it, building a personal brand around altitude mindset and pushing limits. His resume was thin, an EBC track, low bush, guided Cho Oyu. What he didn't mention was that he'd attempted Everest before in 2019 and had turned around at 24,000 feet. He was carrying that failure like an extra oxygen bottle, rebranded as a learning experience. He'd started telling people he had summited Everest. He hadn't. Not once. Pemba Tamang was 38. He'd been guiding for 18 years, 8 summits. He was also newly married 2 months, in fact. The apartment they'd bought in Kathmandu wasn't paid for yet. The marriage felt fragile in the way new marriages do, and this season's earnings were supposed to solidify it. From base camp onward, Mason treated the mountain like it owed him something. He moved fast during acclimatization because he carried the ego of someone who'd already been here in his mind. He challenged Pemba's pacing calls. He clipped into the fixed rope, carelessly sometimes without checking the carabiner, sometimes with an inverted gait. Pemba raised this with the expedition leader. He moves too fast, he doesn't check his clips. The leader listened. The leader had collected Mason's deposit, and Mason had already booked another expedition for September. The leader said he'd talk to him. He didn't, or he did, and Mason didn't hear it, heard it, and didn't care. By May 1st, the weather window opened. Climb now or wait another week. At 11:42 p.m. on May 2nd, Mason and Pemba and 3 other climbers left Camp 4 for the summit. Mason and Pemba reached the summit at 12:47 p.m. He spent 40 minutes filming. When it came time to descend, he moved too fast. Pemba called for him to slow. Mason said he was fine. At 1:23 p.m., they were descending from the south summit, moving toward the south col. The snow was wet May sun had been. Intense, and the bridges were getting thinner. The hazard brief had mentioned this. Crevasse fields are at peak danger from 1 p.m. onward. Don't trust the snow bridges. Mason wasn't afraid. He'd been this high before. He knew how to move. He had the certainty of someone who'd never actually been here. At 1:47 p.m., his foot went through. The crevasse was maybe 6 feet wide. The bridge had held maybe 200 climbers that season. Today, it held 1 less. He fell, and the rope came taut. Pemba was. The anchor above, then the carabiner failed. Not from the impact it failed, because Mason had clipped it inverted, and the gate had opened on the shock load. Pemba felt the rope go slack. He heard Mason cry out once, then nothing. A climber above Pemba couldn't see into the crevasse. Nobody could. Pemba rappelled down 15 feet and looked. Nothing but ice and darkness. He keyed the radio. Climber has fallen. Crevasse entry, no contact. The rescue chain took 40 minutes to form. By the time the first additional climber was rappelling in, it was 2:30 p.m. They descended maybe 30 feet. They saw rope, a jacket. They didn't see Mason. The next morning, they found him 40 feet down, wedged in a narrows, dead for approximately 14 hours. The expedition company investigated. Their report noted, climber's carabiner showed improper clipping, inverted gait documented. Climber responsible for own safety checks. What they didn't note was that Mason had moved recklessly, that Pemba had called for a slower pace, that Mason had dismissed every warning. Pemba's first thought when the rope went slack was, I'm going to be blamed for this. His second thought was, my wife. Pemba continued guiding, but something had changed. When he looked at other clients, he saw the carabiner that had opened. He knew that Mason had been carrying the failure forward, the lie about past summits, the dismissal of guidance, the certainty that the mountain couldn't touch him. The lie had gotten him killed. It had gotten Pemba 15 minutes of terror he'd carry for life. 3 years before Mason, there was a climber who made a different kind of mistake. She wasn't lying about her experience. She was just convinced that sharing the moment mattered more than protecting it.
It was May 21, 2026, on Mount Everest summit ridge at 29,032 feet, where the air contains only 1/3 the oxygen at sea level, and the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Arun Kumar was 53 years old, an IT professional from Hyderabad, India, who had spent his career building software systems and managing complex technical projects. He approached mountaineering the same way, with spreadsheets, optimization, and the belief that preparation could overcome any obstacle. His climbing resume was thin: an EBC trek, some lower peaks. This was his first serious expedition, and he had decided that Everest was the mountain to prove his worth. Arun had attempted Everest once before, in 2025, and had turned around at 7,200 meters due to health complications. That failure had burned him. He spent the following year preparing obsessively altitude chamber training, intensive fitness regimens, expensive gear, and a hired guide from Pioneer Adventures. His wife, Meenakshi, had watched him train with the intensity of someone who couldn't afford to fail twice. His daughters, Anushka and Vidushi, had heard him talk about this summit the way other people talked about destiny. At base camp in April 2026, Arun's guide had noticed something troubling. The client moved too fast during acclimatization rotations. He complained about rest days. He questioned the pacing protocol. The guide raised concerns with the expedition leader. This climber was treating the mountain like a business problem to solve rather than a force to respect. The leader listened, did nothing. Arun had paid the full price. The expedition would proceed as planned. By Camp 3, Arun was showing early warning signs that his body was struggling: persistent headache, nausea, difficulty sleeping despite exhaustion. His oxygen saturation readings were lower than expected for his fitness level. The guide suggested a rest day. Arun refused. He had scheduled this summit for May 21st, and nothing would change that timeline. He had told his office he would be back on May 25th. He had made commitments. At Camp 4, on the morning of May 21st, the weather window was perfect. Clear skies, reasonable winds. The summit push began at 9 p.m. under a star-filled sky. Arun moved too fast. His guide called for him to slow his pace. Arun said he felt strong. By 4 a.m., they had covered more distance than planned. Arun was ahead of schedule. He was ahead of his guide. He was ahead of his body's ability to process the extreme altitude. Arun reached the summit around 5:30 p.m. on May 21st. He stood on the highest point on Earth for approximately 15 minutes, took photos, and began his descent. This is where the mountain reveals its cruelty. The summit is not victory. The summit is the halfway point of an ordeal that has already consumed your body's reserves. Arun's oxygen saturation was approximately 55%. His brain was being starved of oxygen. His judgment was already compromised, though he didn't know it. Descending from the Hillary Step at 6:30 p.m., Arun began vomiting. His guide moved closer, asking if they should find shelter. Arun said he was fine. He had come too far to stop now. At 7:15 p.m., near the South Summit section, the vomiting became worse. There was blood in it. His guide tried to radio for additional support, but the communication was spotty. They continued descending in darkness, with only headlamp light cutting through the cold. By 9 p.m., Arun could barely move. His guide and 2 other Sherpa climbers who had responded to the distress call were now physically supporting him, dragging him down the fixed lines. His body had completely failed. High-altitude pulmonary edema fluid filling his lungs. High-altitude cerebral edema swelling in his brain. Hypoxia so severe his organs were shutting down. At 10:47 p.m., just meters below the Hillary Step, Arun Tiwari's heart stopped. His guides performed CPR for 11 minutes in the freezing dark. It made no difference. His body had been pushed beyond the point where medicine or willpower could save. The autopsy in Kathmandu confirmed high-altitude pulmonary edema as the primary cause. The secondary causes were exhaustion, dehydration, and the cumulative damage of pushing his body beyond its altitude tolerance. Arun had ignored every signal his body was sending. He had treated descent like optional rather than essential. He had confused summit fever with strength. Pioneer Adventures director Navesh Karki released a statement. The guides worked as hard as physically possible to bring him down. But when the body begins to fail at that altitude, there is a point where no amount of effort can reverse the damage. That point comes sooner than most climbers realize. Arun's wife, Meenakshi, gave a statement to reporters from their home in Hyderabad. "My husband wanted to prove something to himself. The mountain proved something different. It proved that no amount of preparation can guarantee safety at extreme altitude. The mountain is not a business problem to solve. It is a force. That does not negotiate with human ambition." The same mountain, the same day, a different story was unfolding just below. On May 24, 2022, the upper slopes of Everest were a freezing gallery of lost ambitions. The temperature at 27,000 feet was -26, with winds sustained at 40 miles per hour. The blue sky above offered no comfort, looking brittle and thin as the high-altitude atmosphere stripped away the warmth from everything it touched. Vanessa Holt was a 29-year-old freelance photographer from Austin who had raised $85,000 through a highly publicized online crowdfunding campaign for a charity climb. The fraud was internal. Vanessa had secretly negotiated a deal with a cut-rate, third-party logistics company to provide expired, low-cost oxygen cylinders, allowing her to pocket nearly 70% of the donated funds for her personal photography studio. She didn't realize it yet, but that choice had already set the timeline. Her guide was Lakpa Dawa, a 37-year-old rescue specialist with 11 major summits to his name. Lakpa was climbing to fund his elderly mother's specialized cardiac care in Kathmandu and to repair their ancestral home, which had been compromised by tectonic shifts. Lakpa checked the pressure valves on the canisters at Camp 4 and found that the seals were degraded, causing the oxygen to leak at a rate 40% faster than normal. When he brought this to the low-cost agency's attention, they told him that no other cylinders were available and that if Vanessa wanted to turn back, she would receive no refund. Vanessa dismissed Lakpa's warnings, stating that her online donors expected a summit and that she wouldn't let logistical paranoia ruin her brand. Her insistence escalated into a midnight departure against the advice of the weather spotters. Lakpa quietly accepted her decision, loaded the faulty cylinders onto his pack, and moved upward into the darkness. By the time they reached the balcony, 2 of the primary cylinders were completely empty. That was the mistake. On the descent from the south summit, Vanessa's supply failed entirely. The oxygen starvation was immediate, causing her to lose motor control within minutes. By the time someone can't touch their own nose, the window is almost closed. Lakpa was forced to hook his own functional oxygen supply to her mask to keep her moving, sacrificing his own safety margin. Vanessa's body failed anyway, her legs giving out completely near the top of the triangular face. The cruel arithmetic of the mountain took over. Lakpa, suffering from severe hypoxia himself, was forced to leave her body attached to the fixed rope when his own vision began to fail. Vanessa died alone in the snow. I sometimes get asked why I keep making these videos, but if I'm being really honest, the main reason is the Sherpas. Their side almost never gets told, and I think that matters more than any of us realize. A reporter later asked Lakpa what he remembered most about that final night on the high slope. He said, "She was looking at her camera screen while her lungs were filling with water, and I knew my mother's medicine was gone. I've ended a lot of these videos and moved on. That one I can't." 5 climbers, 5 separate financial calculations and administrative frauds. And in every case, the cost extended beyond the person who made the choice, reaching into the lives of Sherpas who carried the weight of someone else's decisions long after the mountain had finished with them. It was May 19, 2024. Everest's North Col, 23,000 feet, temperature -22 degrees Fahrenheit, wind blowing 40 miles per hour from the Tibetan Plateau. Jenna McAllister was 28 years old, a fitness influencer with 2.4 million Instagram followers from Los Angeles, California. She had built her brand on extreme wellness content, juice cleanses, cryotherapy, and simulated altitude training in hypoxic tents. She claimed to have climbed Kilimanjaro in 2022, but later investigation revealed she had helicoptered from the last camp to the summit after complaining of severe altitude symptoms that no doctor could confirm. On May 15th, Jenna arrived at Everest Base Camp on the Tibetan side. She immediately began filming content, posing in her expensive mountaineering gear, showing off her branded oxygen mask, talking about how she was mentally preparing for the death zone. Her assigned Sherpa, Pasong, noticed within hours that she had no idea how to use her crampons. She had never practiced self-arrest with an ice axe. She had never slept above 10,000 feet. The warning signs were everywhere. Jenna refused to participate in the team's acclimatization schedule. She said she didn't need it because she had trained in a hypoxic tent for 6 months. Dr. Tashi Wangil, the expedition physician, explained that simulated altitude doesn't replace real acclimatization. Jenna told him he was just trying to scare her for more money. On May 18th, the team climbed to the North Col at 23,000 feet. Jenna's oxygen saturation was 68%, dangerously low for a resting reading at that altitude. Dr. Tashi advised her to descend and try again after 2 rest days. Jenna refused. She said, "My followers expect me to summit on May 20th. I have sponsored posts scheduled." The inciting incident came on May 19th at 6:42 a.m. Jenna woke up at Advanced Base Camp, 21,000 feet, and announced that she had a headache. When Dr. Tashi checked her vitals, her oxygen saturation was 71%, her heart rate was 118. Jenna demanded that a helicopter be called to evacuate her to a hospital in Lhasa. Dr. Tashi explained that she did not meet the criteria for altitude-related emergency evacuation. Her symptoms were mild and would resolve with descent and hydration. Jenna escalated immediately. She began screaming that she had HACE high altitude, cerebral edema, despite showing no symptoms, no confusion, no loss of coordination, no altered mental status. She called her agent in Los Angeles at 7:15 a.m. and told him to call the embassy, call the Chinese authorities, do whatever it takes to get me a helicopter. What Jenna didn't know was that her call was being monitored. The Tibetan Mountaineering Association had installed communication monitors at Advanced Base Camp after a series of fake distress calls in 2023. Her agent called the U.S. Embassy in Beijing at 8:30 a.m. The embassy contacted Chinese rescue services. A helicopter was dispatched from Lhasa at a cost of $47,000, money that would ultimately be billed to Jenna's travel insurance. When the helicopter arrived at 10:15 a.m., a Chinese rescue doctor examined Jenna. He spent 12 minutes checking her vitals, her coordination, her mental status. His report, later released to Expedition.
It was April 18, 2019, on the Nepal side of Mount Everest at 17,598 feet, where the air above a certain elevation doesn't feel like cold, it feels like pressure distributed against every exposed surface of your body. Brielle Mortensen had been there for 11 days and hadn't yet reached the elevation she needed for the content she came to get. She never would. Brielle was 28, a wellness and fitness influencer from Scottsdale, Arizona, with 156,000 followers watching her post gym selfies and motivational captions about limiting beliefs. Her sponsor was an electrolyte drink company. The brand launch was locked to a summit deadline, May 15th. If she didn't summit by then, the deal fell apart. She told herself the deadline was fuel. It was actually a death sentence. She didn't know it yet. Her resume was thin. Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, all guided, all managed by outfitters who build safety like it's infrastructure. What she didn't mention publicly was how badly her body had struggled at every high camp. What she posted was the summit photos from her phone. Furba Sherpa was 34. He'd summited Everest 5 times. He had 15 years of high-altitude work. His daughter was 6 years old and attended an English medium school in Kathmandu, the kind that costs money he only earned during climbing season. He'd calculated every expedition like an equation. This one was supposed to be simple. 6 more years of work, then he'd retire. From the moment Brielle arrived at base camp, Furba saw the type. The ones with sponsors were always tighter than the ones climbing for themselves. When she started talking about her May 15th deadline, during the acclimatization brief, he noted it. When she posted photos from Camp 1 before acclimatization was even finished, the pressure shifted. The first rotation to Camp 2 went badly. Her body swelled slightly mild edema in her fingers. By Camp 2, at 21,000 feet, her pace dropped by 40%. Furba watched her move like a metronome slowing down, and he knew she couldn't handle what came next. What she did was post a selfie with the caption, "Higher than my doubters can dream." The expedition leader brushed it off. The company had already collected the deposit. Refunding now meant money spent on permits and Sherpa wages already gone. Furba raised the concern again. The leader nodded and said nothing. Brielle's behavior escalated. She filmed at every camp transition. She'd stop to adjust her phone's angle while the rope team waited. She took 3 versions of the same photo at different exposures, trying to nail the lighting. Furba watched and said nothing. He'd learned. That confrontation at base camp never changed behavior at 23,000 feet. The mountain was the only argument that ever won. The summit push briefing came on May 3rd. Turnaround protocol was 1 p.m. Anyone past turnaround had to descend, period. This is mountaineering arithmetic. You have fixed hours of daylight, fixed calories, fixed oxygen. Furba and Brielle left Camp 4 at 11:47 p.m. on May 10th. By dawn, they were at the south summit. She stopped to film a sunrise video. The clock was already starting to lie. She reached the summit at 12:34 p.m., 26 minutes past turnaround. Furba looked at her and said one sentence, "We descend now." she said. 5 more minutes for photos. She took 40 minutes of photos. The weather was still clear, so the mind uses that as evidence that danger isn't real. But the mountain doesn't operate on what you see. It operates on what's coming. By the time they started descending, it was 1:14 p.m. At 2:47 p.m., approximately 200 meters above the south, Colonel, the serac broke. A serac is a block of ice, sometimes 30 feet, sometimes 100 feet. This one had been holding for 17 days. Today, the sun angle was wrong, or the wind stress was right, or the physics simply changed. Seracs don't announce themselves. The sound arrives after the movement. A climber 40 meters below described what he saw. The ice came straight down. Not a slide, a collapse. The whole thing disintegrated into maybe 20 large chunks and 1,000 pieces of shrapnel. It spread across the whole route. Furba was still 5 meters above Brielle. He was clipped into the fixed line. The serac hit him across the left leg and left side of his body. His femur fractured with a sound the climber below also heard. He fell. The rope held him. Brielle was struck by secondary debris and knocked into a small crevasse offset from the main line. She fell 8 feet and stopped against ice walls. She was conscious. Her legs moved, but she was trapped, and when the adrenaline wore off, her hands were already starting to numb. The system doesn't pause for rescue. It does math. Tenzin Lama, the climber below, was now the rope leader. He could go down to Brielle, she was closer, maybe savable. Or he could stay with Furba, stabilize him, and wait for other climbers to come down and form a rescue chain. If Tenzin left Furba alone, Furba might die from shock. If Tenzin went to Brielle, she might also die, and then Furba would definitely die. Tenzin made the decision that defined his next 20 years. He stayed with Furba. They got Furba down. They looked down at where Brielle was trapped. The crevasse was narrow. The walls were ice. Any attempt to repel would risk losing the rescue climber too, and they were running out of daylight. Tenzin stayed. Furba was lowered. Brielle stayed in the crevasse as the sun moved across the sky. She was conscious through the evening. Climbers above tried calling down to her. By morning, she was still, and her body temperature had stopped registering. Furba survived. His femur healed, but his climbing career ended at 34. The medical bills, the rehabilitation, his insurance barely covered it. His daughter's school tuition went unpaid for 6 months. His wife took a job in a hotel kitchen in Pokhara. The thing he'd calculated so carefully, 6 more years, then retirement had been deleted in the 8 seconds it took a serac to fall. The mountain didn't distinguish between her choices and his loss. Now, the next story isn't about a climber who made one catastrophic mistake. It's about someone who built an entire identity on a lie, and when the mountain tested that lie, there was nobody home to answer.
It was May 20th, 2026, when Sandeep, 46 years old, successfully summited Everest in the late afternoon. Sandeep had lived in Arizona, but was born in India. He was an IT professional like Arun, though their paths had taken different directions. Sandeep had summited before Denali, Aconcagua, Kilimanjaro. He had the experience Arun lacked, but on this mountain, in this season, experience
was April 25, 2018, on Mount Everest Northeast Ridge at 28,000 feet, where the air is thin enough that every decision moves slowly and every consequence arrives fast. Cassidy Whitmore was 26. From Boulder, Colorado, though she'd lived in Los Angeles building a TikTok presence, 234,000 followers. Her brand was Limits or Lies. The sponsor was a boutique adventure apparel company. They wanted her to climb the mountain, film it, and post real-time via satellite and fiber. What nobody told her, because it was implicit, is that real-time posting from 21,000 feet requires dividing your attention between staying alive and staying relevant. For Cassidy, those things had stopped being compatible somewhere. Around Camp 2, Pasang Sherpa was 31, 13 years of guiding, 5 8,000-meter summits. His 6-year-old son was born with a cleft palate. The surgery was scheduled for August in Kathmandu, a private clinic. Good reputation, high cost. Pasang's wife had asked him directly, "How many more expeditions until we can afford it?" He'd done the math. This expedition was number 4. One more good season and his son could get fixed. From base camp onward, Cassidy was filming. The landscape, the tents, the Sherpa porters. Every moment was potential content. The problem is that climbing Everest requires minute-by-minute presence. The mountain doesn't pause for Brule. During the rotation to Camp 1, Pasang watched her stop to frame a shot of the Khumbu icefall. Standing on the rope, one hand on the line, the other on her phone, trying to get the angle right. A climber positioned above described seeing her standing on a suspect section of bridge, immobile, filming for maybe 4 minutes. Basang moved her bodily off the unstable ground. She laughed and said, "Did you see that shot? At Camp 2, she set up a filming station. 45 minutes of meditation sequence with the mountain in background. While she was filming, her oxygen levels dropped. Her face paled. Basang moved her to medical. It took 2 hours for her vitals to stabilize." He approached the leader. "She's not acclimatizing well. The filming is making it worse. She's distracted." The leader understood. The footage was exceptional. The satellite company was happy. The sponsor was happy. The only person with a problem was the person trying to keep her alive. The leader said he talked to her. Cassidy's response was gracious in public. "I totally understand. Safety first." Then she went back to her tent, edited her footage, and uploaded it via SatFi. 2 hours later, the video had 47,000 likes. The algorithm had spoken. The mountain was secondary. Basang stopped raising concerns. He'd learned the politics. By April 23rd, the weather was favorable. Summit window opening. The camp made the call. She left Camp 4 at 11 p.m. on April 24th with Basang and 2 other climbers. They moved reasonably fast. By dawn, they were on the upper northeast ridge. By noon, they were approaching the summit. Cassidy reached the summit at 12:34 p.m. The first thing she did was film a 360-degree video, turning in a complete circle with her phone extended. Basang watched from behind her. He was tired. He was aware that turnaround was closing, that her standing on the summit ridge spinning in a circle was taking exactly the time they couldn't spare. He called out, "We need to move. Descent now," she said. One more angle. She stepped backward to get a different perspective. Behind her, not visible, the cornice overhung the ridge by maybe 8 feet. The cornice is snow shaped by wind into a cantilever and overhang with nothing beneath it except a 2,000-foot vertical drop onto the Tibet side. She took one more step backward. The cornice fractured silently. Basang saw her expression change a moment of confusion, like her brain had sent an "I'm falling" signal, but her body hadn't registered it. She disappeared, not dramatically, just gone. Basang moved immediately to the edge. She was visible for maybe 30 feet of the drop, tumbling against snow. Then the surface curved away and he couldn't see her anymore. He keyed the radio. "Cassidy has fallen, cornice collapsed, she's gone." The search that followed was ceremonial. Her body wasn't recoverable from the Tibet side without permissions neither country wanted to grant. She stayed on the mountain. What did get recovered was her phone. The final video was still queued in the app, ready to post, waiting for a SatFi connection. 2 hours later, when a climber reached base camp with the phone, the video was manually uploaded. It got 127,000 likes in the first 12 hours. Basang didn't climb again for 2 years. He couldn't. The guilt had. His son's surgery was postponed. His wife had to find work. When he did finally return to guiding, he was different, stricter, more conservative. Climbers complained. He wouldn't let us summit, overly cautious. What he actually was someone who'd watched the algorithm kill someone and decided that no video was worth the weight of that memory. 2 years later, on the same mountain, a different kind of arrogance would show its face. This time, it wasn't about content. It was about entitlement, pure and simple.
It was May 20th, 2026, at approximately 8 a.m. when Sandeep reached the summit of Mount Everest. The morning was clear. The visibility was perfect. He could see for hundreds of miles in every direction the curvature of the earth visible beneath him, clouds arranged thousands of feet below like a white ocean. He stood on the highest point on earth and took photos. Tulasi Reddy, his climbing partner of 50 days, was somewhere behind him on the mountain, also making his push toward the summit. Sandeep had trained hard for this moment. He had invested months of preparation, enormous expense, and the physical and mental endurance required to reach 29,032 feet. He had reached the summit. He had made it. The rest was supposed to be the easier part, the descent, getting down, going home to his 17-year-old son waiting in Arizona. But Sandeep was 46 years old, and he didn't know what Arizona meant anymore. Not really. He had been born in India, had climbed in the Himalayas as a young man, understood mountains the way only someone from India can understand mountains. But he had lived in Arizona for years. He had become an American climber, hiking the Grand Canyon rim to rim, preparing his body in the desert. He had brought his climbing partner Tulasi with him to Everest, as more than a partner, as a best friend, someone he had spent 50 days with at altitude, someone he had shared the trial of climbing with. Tulasi had said of him, he was super strong climber, not just physically strong, the kind of strength that comes from having something to prove to yourself. The descent from the summit began at approximately 9 a.m. on May 20th. Sandeep started carefully, following the fixed ropes, moving methodically through the south summit area. The route was crowded. May 21st had been the projected weather window for most expeditions, but some teams were taking their shot on May 20th. There were other climbers on the mountain, other people moving up and down, all trying to navigate the same fixed ropes, the same sections of terrain that killed people every season. Sandeep moved down slowly. He didn't rush. He understood the mountain enough to know that rushing kills more people than caution. By noon, he was passing through the level terrain between the south summit and Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. His eyes had been exposed to extreme altitude conditions for hours. The sun reflecting off snow and ice creates an intense glare at sea level. At 28,000 feet, that glare becomes something else. The UV radiation is unfiltered by atmosphere. The reflection. Off-white ice and snow is blinding literally. Climbers wear specialized glacier glasses with dark lenses to protect their eyes, but nothing fully protects you from extreme altitude sun exposure. Nothing fully prevents the damage. Sandeep's eyes began to burn. This was normal, every climber experiences this, but the burning didn't stop. It intensified. By 1 p.m., as he continued his descent below the south summit, his vision began to blur. This was no longer normal altitude eye strain. His eyes were inflaming. The delicate tissue on the surface of his eyes, the epithelium, was being burned by UV radiation and dehydration. Snow blindness, photokeratitis, had begun. He couldn't see clearly anymore. The terrain in front of him was becoming a white blur. The fixed ropes he was following were becoming harder to locate. The steps he needed to place his feet on were becoming indistinct. Sandeep's guides moved closer. They could see something was wrong. His movements had changed. His pace had slowed further. They were asking him questions in Nepali, in English, trying to assess his condition. Sandeep told them his eyes hurt. He said the sun was bright. He said maybe if they descended faster, got to lower altitude where the air was thicker, where the sun exposure wasn't so intense, his eyes would improve. So they descended faster. But the faster descent created new problems. At extreme altitude, descending faster means less acclimatization time between camps, less recovery time for the body. Sandeep's oxygen saturation was already critically low from the summit push. His body was already compromised by exhaustion and thin air. His brain was already being starved of oxygen. And now he was pushing his body harder, making it work faster when it was already at the breaking point. By 2:30 p.m., his eyes weren't just burning, he was losing vision. Colors were becoming unclear. Shapes were becoming ambiguous. He was moving down a mountain he could no longer see clearly, being guided by men whose voices he could hear but whose faces were becoming indistinct. This is when altitude sickness compounds with physical injury. This is when the body starts failing on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sandeep's guides recognized the severity now. This wasn't eye strain. This was snow blindness progressing rapidly. They called for additional support. Other Sherpa guides from lower camps began moving up to intercept them. The word was passed down the mountain. Climber in distress, vision loss, need additional hands to bring him down. By 3 p.m., Sandeep could not see. Total blindness. Not vision impaired, not reduced vision blind. His eyes had been exposed to extreme UV radiation for almost 7 hours straight of altitude. The epithelial cells of his corneas had been fried. His tears had evaporated in the dry air. His eyes had simply stopped working. He was now a blind man at 26,500 feet on a mountain that kills people who can see everything. He was being guided by touch, by voice, by the physical contact of Sherpa hands on his body, telling him where to step, how to move, when to breathe. At this point in the story, most people would have turned around completely. Most climbers with total vision loss at high altitude would say, "Find a way to get me to shelter, get me oxygen, get me down immediately." But at extreme altitude, there is no immediately. There is no helicopter rescue. At 26,500 feet, there is only the incredibly slow process of hand-guiding a blind climber down a mountain where one mistake means a 1,000-foot fall in any direction. One mistake means death, and Sandeep's guides had to make that walk anyway. They had to get him down. They had no other choice. 5 Sherpa guides were now with Sandeep. They had established a human chain. One guide in front, one behind, guides on either side, and Sandeep in the middle, literally being lowered down the mountain. He was holding on to ropes, but he wasn't navigating them. The guides were navigating for him. Step left, step right, hold the rope, don't let go. Lower yourself slowly. There's ice here. Watch the slope. The guides were giving constant verbal instructions because Sandeep's eyes were absolutely useless. But there was another problem developing. Snow blindness was one issue. But at extreme altitude, the body under extreme stress often experiences other acute conditions simultaneously. Sandeep was showing signs of high-altitude cerebral edema-HACE-swelling of the brain from oxygen deprivation and fluid accumulation. His confusion was increasing. He was asking where they were. He was forgetting instructions seconds after receiving them. He was becoming disoriented. The guides recognized HACE symptoms. They knew this was critical. A climber with HACE can lose consciousness suddenly. A climber with HACE can die very quickly. They descended through Camp 4 around 5 p.m. Sandeep was given supplemental oxygen. Medical supplies were used. The guides worked with him, trying to stabilize his condition, trying to keep him conscious, trying to keep moving downward. Every meter of descent meant the air was slightly thicker, the oxygen levels were slightly higher, the chance of survival was slightly better. But every meter also meant more exposure, more time at altitude, more chance that his body would fail completely. By 7 p.m., they had reached Camp 3 at approximately 23,500 feet. Sandeep was still blind. He was still showing signs of HACE. He was disoriented. He was confused. His body was failing in multiple ways simultaneously. The guides gave him more oxygen. They hydrated him. They tried to restore some level of consciousness and stability. They had to get him to Camp 2, which was another 2,500 feet of descent, another several hours of work guiding a blind man down a mountain. The decision was made. Continue the descent through the night. Don't stop. Don't rest. Just keep moving down, because staying at altitude is death, and the only thing that might save Sandeep is getting him to lower altitude where his brain can begin to recover, where the oxygen levels are higher, where emergency medical care is available. The guides roped him off. They began the night descent with headlamps cutting through darkness, guiding a blind man down a mountain he couldn't see, in temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. Between 9 p.m. and midnight, they navigated below Camp 3 toward Camp 2. The terrain got slightly easier as they descended. The air got slightly thicker. Sandeep's condition was still critical, but at least the immediate danger of extreme altitude was decreasing with every meter down. The guides were exhausted. They had been working non-stop for hours, but they kept moving. This is what guides do. This is what Sherpa climbers do. When someone's life depends on them, they keep moving. By 1:30 a.m. on May 21st, they reached Camp 2 at approximately 21,000 feet. Sandeep was brought into a tent. Medical assessment was immediate. His eyes were severely damaged, snow blindness confirmed, but he was below the altitude where immediate death from HACE was likely. His oxygen saturation was approximately 58% low, but survivable at this altitude. He was confused, but conscious. He was alive. They had gotten him down alive. The guides gave him supplemental oxygen. They administered medications for HACE. They hydrated him. They kept him warm. They did everything that could be done at 21,000 feet in the middle of the night in a tent. Sandeep had successfully summited Mount Everest. He had overcome extreme altitude, extreme weather, and the physical limit of human endurance to reach the summit. But on the descent, his eyes had failed him. His brain had swollen. His body had said no more, and all the guides' effort, all their skill, all their willingness to keep moving it had gotten him to Camp 2 alive, which seemed like survival. But survival at 21,000 feet at midnight after extreme. Altitude sickness is not the same as being out of danger. The altitude is still dangerous. The lack of oxygen is still severe. The body is still compromised. HACE doesn't reverse quickly. Just because you're at a lower altitude, it continues to progress. The swelling in the brain continues. The brain can herniate. The respiratory system can fail. At 2 a.m. on May 21st, Sandeep's condition began to deteriorate again. His breathing became irregular. His consciousness began to fade. The guides kept him on oxygen. They kept trying. But the swelling in his brain had progressed too far. The damage was too extensive. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on May 21st, at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet, with 5 Sherpa guides around him, with oxygen flowing into his lungs, with men who had spent hours trying to save his life holding his hands in the darkness, Sandeep's brain gave out. The swelling was too much. His respiratory system failed. He died not from falling, not from avalanche, not from the immediate catastrophe that people imagine when they think of mountain deaths. He died died from the mountain's slow torture. He died from a combination of conditions. He died from being a blind man at extreme altitude, whose body simply ran out of function. And the hardest part of this story isn't that he died. The hardest part is that his family in Arizona would never see his body. His 17-year-old son would never get to say goodbye to his father, because Sandeep died at Camp 2. And bringing his body down from Camp 2 is logistically complex. Bringing a body from 21,000 feet down to base camp requires additional porters, additional risk, additional resources. So his family made the decision: leave him on the mountain. His body remains at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet, preserved in the cold, a permanent resident of the place where his lungs failed. Tulasi Reddy, Sandeep's climbing partner and best friend for 50 days on the mountain, gave a statement to media. He was the strongest climber I have ever met. On the mountain, none of that strength matters. The altitude doesn't care how strong you are. It just takes what it needs. On May 20th, Sandeep could see everything the world laid out beneath him from the summit. By May 21st, he was blind. His brain was swelling, his body was failing, and his journey up ended in a way he never imagined possible when he was taking those summit photos in the morning sun. This is what Everest does. It gives you the summit and takes away everything else. It gives you the achievement and takes away your sight. It gives you the victory and takes away your son's father. It gives you 50 days of climbing with your best friend and then separates you forever at 21,000 feet. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. If you've ever pushed your body beyond what it could handle, if you've ever ignored the signals that something was wrong, if you've ever convinced yourself that strength alone is enough to overcome any obstacle, subscribe, because there are more stories of mountains that teach these lessons at the cost of lives. I'll see you on the next descent.